Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And welcome to this week's Thoughtful Thursday. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube at Hacking Your Leadership and leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're using. On this Thoughtful Thursday, I want to talk about one element of an article that I was reading yesterday. The article was talking about the increased expectations on leaders in the wake of employees changing jobs, finding more reasons to leave their current job and go elsewhere. The article specifically mentions that leaders are now being asked to, at least in part, help employees with their own personal development, work-life balance goals, wellness, and personal values, more so than just whatever the job requirements are. And that makes sense. The good leaders that I know did at least some of that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The difference now is that it is a cost of admission for a lot of leaders, and a lot of leaders don't really know how to do that. One of the elements of this is, in terms of an expectation from employees, is that the process for hiring and promoting people has been viewed as unfair and unequitable for a very, very long time in a lot of organizations. And, having been in the receiving end of some of these things where I got passed over for a role and was left to my own devices thinking, I wonder why that person got it and not me. Oh, I'm clearly better than they are. Why did they get it? Who do they know? Who are they friends with? That kind of thing. To being on the giving out end of that and having to make a promotion decision or a hiring decision and knowing in my heart that I made it fairly and equitably. I think there's a lot of disconnect here because there's some challenges in a lot of organizations with not necessarily the process, but with the light and the transparency being shown on the process, meaning more work needs to be done to make sure employees know things are fair and equitable. What are your thoughts about this?
It's a great conversation because I think that a couple things, there's a lot in this article, so I'm glad that we kind of pulled a couple of these pieces out of it. But the talent selection process, especially when you're already in the organization, obviously as an external candidate going somewhere, you kind of have an idea of how interviews go. You talk to somebody, then you talk to somebody else, then you talk to somebody else, then somebody at some point makes a decision. Right?
Sure.
And you answer the questions to the best of your ability. What ends up happening within an organization is now you have other factors that are involved, including the day-to-day work and the measurement of that day-to-day work, and the kind of publicizing what roles people want to have, and then what work are they doing to those roles. And then you have different leaders and different people that have different opinions on what looks good for that role specifically. So you kind of have all these other things that are to an external candidate maybe behind the scenes. But to an internal candidate, you know these people, you know the peers that may also be a part of a process, the leaders that are a part of the decision-making process. So I think there's a lot more complexity to it that, to your point, requires a lot more transparency. And here is the process. Here is the job description. Here are the things that we are going to be assessing on. Here are the types of skills that we're looking for that we want to ask you about. Like these are all the things that I think a lot of organizations are continuing to evolve and that are looking at because there's the actual process, then there's the perception of the process. And I love that you shared, you and I both, we've been on both sides of these coins before. We've gone through a process and then been passed up for a job and felt a certain way about it, and probably convinced us that there's all these other things that are going on, and whether some of them are right or not, like that's just the kind of headspace that you get into. And then we've been on the side where we then have to make a decision, and it's not as cut and dry as can somebody do the job or not? Because I think that with good teams and high performing teams, you should have multiple people that are capable of doing the job, which then means that you're making a decision around maybe specific skills that are needed or things that are a part of the larger team that you're making a decision for that you need to consider, or where somebody is at currently right now in the work that they're doing, the relationships they have, and how that impact may be important for the team that they're going to be leading. Like there's a lot more in it where it's not as simple as, can you do the job? Yes or no? Like, no. Like you may have 2, 3, 4 people that can absolutely do the job, but one of them, based upon what you know, what you see, and what you're looking for, may be a better fit. and that's where I think it tends to maybe get a little bit more, a little bit harder to have people connect some of those dots.
There's always this kind of divide or kind of decisions that companies have to make in terms of when a role is open, do you promote internally or do you hire externally? And I'm long since past the point of trying to pick apart why I didn't get a job if I was an external candidate, because I'll never know anyway, right? I'll never know. I don't have any insight, and so I just move on. I think it's maybe a little bit easier to do that when you're an external candidate. When you're an internal candidate, you have enough information to where you think you do know why you got passed over for something when you might not actually know the reasons why. And it's incumbent upon leaders to make sure that you do know why you were passed over for something if you didn't get something. And sometimes that answer is simply, hey, you know what? There were 3 people, you were one of them, and all 3 of you could do the job really, really well. And next time it wasn't your time this time. It probably will be next time, but let's talk. Keep working at it. I get how this is frustrating, but stay with me here. It just wasn't your time this time. And so I get some of that. I heard a long time ago that when you're trying to get promoted within an organization, your interview is every day, right? Like if you are applying externally, you have your interview time. But if you're applying internally, you can't just assume that what you did for the last 3 months or 6 months or 2 years gets ignored, and it's just how you performed in the interview. The work that you did is going to be considered as it should be, which is a benefit to the organization in terms of making decisions. It's you promote somebody internally. One of the benefits you have is that you can see what they've done for the last however much time they've been there, and you're more likely to know whether or not they're going to do a good job in that role once they get promoted. I recently was working alongside somebody who was just promoted for a role, and leading up to them being promoted, they basically did the job for more than a year. The role was vacant, and they did that job kind of informally, and then kind of in a temporary capacity formally for a bit of time, and did it really, really well. But when the time came to actually hire for the role, the process was the exact same as it had been if that had not been the case. The opening was posted, and there was an interview process, and a dozen or more people applied, and they were all interviewed for it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is a farce. Like, they're going through the motions when clearly the right decision has been made. Now, I don't know if that's the case. What if somebody had come out from nowhere, like the dark horse candidate out of the blue that just comes up and takes over? I guess that's possible. But if you're a leader and you're thinking this person already has the job, you're clearly going to go into your interviews with other people, with that kind of bias with you. And so as an organization, whatever that is, whatever that looks like, the more transparency you could put on that process, the better. And so what I want to ask you, Lorenzo, is have you ever had to be openly transparent about something when the system wasn't transparent itself, but you knew that you had to say certain things to candidates during a promotion process that if you hadn't said, you wouldn't have been doing anything necessarily wrong, but it would have left them to kind of create the story in their own head, and it would have led to the wrong opinions being made in their own minds. So you had to kind of go out of your way to make sure there was transparency when the system wasn't transparent. So I want to ask you that, but first I want to give it up to one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, what steps have you taken in the past to kind of increase the transparency around these processes when just kind of following whatever the rules were wouldn't have led to the people involved having the best feeling coming out of it?
It's interesting. I think there's a couple things that I've done over time just to help people through a process to consider things that they may have not considered. But then I also think that there are times when you have to be very transparent, and it's happened to me where people have said like, hey, just want this is a very competitive role. This is a very competitive job. There are some highly qualified candidates. You are one of many highly qualified candidates that we are considering. Right?
How do you hear that and not read between the lines of, oh, what you're saying is I'm not going to get this job?
Right. Well, that's the initial. You're like, oh, yeah. Okay, well then just tell me no then, right?
Yeah, right.
And the reality is that that doesn't mean anything. That just means that that's stating a fact, but that's somebody being very upfront and transparent. But to a degree, you might look at that and say like, okay, like I know what you're saying. What you're saying is that potentially it might not be me, and I think that's perfectly fine to say that. And the reality is like, that's the truth, like 90% of the time, probably. Like there's always qualified candidates, and that's the whole reason why you have the process. But I think it's important that that's not assumed and that it's said. I think that's an important thing. I think the other thing that I've done in the past is asked people. I was like, especially when you have a great talent pipeline of people that work for you in an organization. And I'm really a big proponent of being like, very public and social with like what people's intents are. Like what do you want to do next? What's the next job that you want to have? Let's make that known to everybody, because then that way we don't, number one, we don't miss anybody that may have an interest in something. But number two, it's an element of like social accountability that we should all be supporting one another. We know. But I would ask people in the interview process, like, if not you, then who?
Oh, I like that.
So are you aware of who's applied? If you were to say that you had to make a choice in this decision and it couldn't be you, who would you pick and why? And what it allows me to assess and understand is, how do some of my best people and great candidates see each other? And how do they see their work, and how do they see the work of others? And what does that look like? And there are times when many of the candidates have exactly the same name. And that's a very helpful data point to say that this person really has the respect of their peer group, and those that are looking to advance their career appreciate this person's work. That's helpful. Many times that person may end up getting the job, and I think it's helpful because people are like, well, I get that. I understand that. Like, that makes sense to me. Because if it wasn't me, that's the person that I would want to have that job. Not all the time, and sometimes you can't be necessarily like that forward if you have internal and external candidates. They don't know everybody, but like, I'm just saying that, to your point, sometimes you have to ask questions or provide more information to make sure that people are clear on what the process is, what's going on. And in the example that you gave, that person that may have been doing the work for a temporary amount of time, like, yeah, you know what? There is a process, and there's a process for a reason. And an organization can say, like, is a fair and consistent process regardless of what you bring. I would think and hope that the person who had been doing the job, and to your point, like your interviewers every day, they probably have a little bit of a leg up when it comes to answering questions about the job.
Yeah,
they've been doing the work,
right.
and that's how that should play out, and that's how it should happen. But yeah, there are times when there may be another candidate that comes in and they're fantastic talent, and you have an obligation to the organization, to the team, to promote or to hire the best person. That's going to happen too.
Yeah, I think having a process in place, even when for an individual set of circumstances, it's not needed, right? So I know this person's been in role, kind of informally doing it. They're doing a great job. The team loves them. They're clearly the right person for this. The moment you throw the process out, because in this particular instance, it seems like you're going through the motions of the process when the decision is clear. The moment you throw that process out is the moment people stop to trust the process, because they think there is no process. We just do what we want in the moment. So as much as people might roll their eyes at going through the motions when it seems like the result is clear, the negatives associated with not having a process, or a process that kind of gets, we'll take this part of it and that part of it depending on what we like or what we don't like, that will cause much more damage to your team. And so the consistency around the process and the transparency around that consistency, even if it goes as far as saying, I know that this is all happening, but I want to walk you through it. This is how it's going to happen. These are the next steps. This is who you're going to talk to next. This is where we're going to sit down and have this conversation. You might feel almost like I've had these conversations with people where it's been where I'm being talked to, and I almost feel patronized, almost like, wait, just talk to me like we're friends. Talk to me like we're the same coworkers we've been for the last 2 years. You're putting such a formality to this. It's like, no, this formality is needed, because we want to make sure that you understand that just because I like you and you like me and we have a trusting relationship right now, you might trust that in the lack of formality that things went the right way. The next person you have this conversation with, maybe you don't have that relationship with them, and that formality will be needed in order to make sure that you trust the process, because the process is more important than any of us individually. So I think that's really, really important for leaders. Make sure that process is in place and make sure there's transparency around it.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.